Hey guys, it's Drippin' and Butter here. I'm sure you guys have heard that Epic Games is in a lawsuit against Apple and Google currently. They made these documents public. The one against Apple is a 62-page document. So I took the liberty of spending 3+ hours pulling out all the key highlights of what Epic Games is actually trying to accomplish with this to better the developers community and consumers community, which this will hopefully outline for you, what they're trying to do. So I will try and keep this as unbiased as possible. A lot of it will be either paraphrasing or direct quotes from the actual lawsuit. So to start off the actual lawsuit, Epic uses a quote by Apple in 1984 stating, IBM appears to want to monopolize the computer market and Apple's the only hope for its competition. Then fast forward to 2020, Apple's the very thing they sought to destroy by using a series of anti-competitive restraints and monopolistic practices for mobile devices processing consumer payments in which they're taking a 30% profit or tax on all of those payments. Now, this anti-competitive restraints and monopolistic practices are the majority of this lawsuit. And through all of this, I really hope you see what Apple's actually done to keep their power. Epic brings to light that smartphones are essential now, which they really are. They're just personal computers you can carry around all day. They state Apple wants to maintain a monopoly over iOS app distribution markets and iOS in-app purchases, where they are taking that 30%. They have a 100% monopoly over this, using those anti-competitive restraints, and at one point even quote that it's Apple's way or the highway. Now, the biggest takeaway from this, and this is a direct quote, is Epic is not seeking monetary compensation from this court for injuries suffered, nor is Epic seeking favorable treatment for itself, a single company. Instead, Epic is seeking injunctive relief to allow fair competition in these two markets that affect hundreds of millions of consumers and tens of thousands of third-party app developers. So Epic is doing this maybe like slightly for them because it will benefit them in the end. But for the most part, they're trying to bring competition to a market that is currently held as a monopoly by Apple. Epic states Apple bans any innovation that can compete with these app store, which forces consumers to fork over more money or higher prices so developers can pay that 30% Apple tax. And Epic states this several times that this tax hurts consumers just as much as developers, because for any small app developer, they're going to have the consumer have to bear the weight of that 30% tax. Epic states that if not for Apple's illegal restraint, Epic would provide a competing app store in which people could download games and not have to pay as much for in-app purchases. And we'll get to more on how they want to actually make it cheaper in a little bit. Epic then goes on to state that this is contrary to how Macs operate, because Macs allow the freedom for developers to distribute their products through the App Store or any other third-party distribution site. And it should be no different than mobile. It does not have to be this way. Epic seeks to end Apple's dominance over key technology markets. Apple forces the use for iOS operating system with no other options. Most people won't change their operating system. I know a lot of Apple users really like the interface and all that. But if you have certain goals that you have in mind for your own personal device, you should be able to change your operating system. I know for people who do coding, if they have a Windows PC, they might switch to Linux because Linux is an operating system developed by coders to basically help you code easier. And then they state that you need a different line of coding for Android and iOS. And this is huge because anytime an app developer makes an app for an Android, they can reach the 10 plus huge companies of Android devices with one line of coding. And then they have to go back and recreate everything just to reach the 1.5 billion devices specifically made that are for Apple. So they have to do twice the amount of coding to produce one game. Epic states iOS users spend nearly twice as much money as Android users in the in-app store, which is huge. Apple's taken a 30% profit on, I think it was about $100 the average Apple user spends yearly. So they're taking, a 30% tax on $100 across 1.5 billion devices. Epic states Apple prohibits downloading apps from websites, and this is, on Android, Epic allowed you to download Fortnite through the Epic Games Store website and download the app that way. Android allows this. Apple allows you to only download apps through the in-app store, which is, part of that monopoly. Then they go into the developers agreement a little bit, and it said may be distributed by Apple. So people can create this app that they think is a great idea or a great game, and then Apple can just refuse it because there's no other way to get that app out to people. So they would have to change to fit all into Apple's guidelines just so they can get their product out to people. Apple makes developers agree not to create or distribute apps by a third-party system. And this is, when Epic released that alternate payment method last week where you could pay $7.99 for this same amount of in-game currency as a $9.99 payment. Nobody's going to take the higher payment. You might as well save the money, and that would give Epic more money. Epic actually approached Apple to offer its Epic Games Store, which has over 250 games in it. And Apple's response was an unequivocal no. Apple stated that blocking third-party distribution platforms is essential to enforce privacy and security. This has no backing. They're stating to enforce privacy and security, you have to use the App Store. Yet, going back to the Macs, where developers can use a third-party distribution site, why is it different on a mobile computer than it is on a laptop or something? Then Epic goes into the anti-competitive effects in the iOS app distribution market. They say it harms all would-be competing app distributors like Epic Games would be willing to do by offering their Epic Games Store and taking on other third-party developers. And they say this in the second point that they could develop the iOS compatible app store, providing both consumers and developers a choice, which, quoting them, injecting healthy competition for price, service, and innovation. They then go on to state two different companies that Apple has denied. On August 6th, 2020, Apple denied Microsoft's xCloud. I'm sure most Xbox players are going to be offended by that, especially if they have, an Xbox and an iOS device. It's not compatible between the two. Then on August 7th, New York Times reported Facebook had tried for 6 months to gain an approval of a Facebook gaming app for streaming and playing simple games. Facebook eventually caved under Apple's power, and then Facebook's vice president for gaming stated shared pain across the gaming community, which hurts players and developers. Then Epic goes back to the 30% tax, stating that developers are forced to suffer lower profits, reduce quantity or quality of games, raise prices to consumers, or a combination of the three. They say Apple denies consumers a choice of how to obtain apps, which prevents innovation, therefore denying consumers opportunity to find and access apps. Furthermore, the 30% tax is much higher than it would be, forcing consumers to bear the weight of the tax by increased costs. Then they go on to actually provide a few other third-party app payment processors, such as Square or PayPal. Now, Square has a 2.6 to 3.5% tax, and PayPal takes a 2.9% cut, which is literally 10 times lower than Apple's 30% tax. But because Apple has these anti-competitive restraints and essentially a monopoly over it, you have to pay that 30% tax. Where Epic Games is stating, if they're able to create that other iOS compatible app store, they could have that, PayPal, which has a 10% or 10 times lower tax. They state it's essential developers should be able to choose the payment processor to best suit them and the consumer. I agree with. If you create the entire game, why can't you create the best payment processor that fits into the game instead of having to code Apple's payment processor into it specifically? Epic then goes back to the developers agreement that games must use. And I'm really glad they put some of this developers agreement in there, because it's not something that most people would, think to look up, but it has huge aspects. So mobile games now must use in-app purchases. Apps may not use their own mechanics to unlock content or functionality, or use external links to direct customers to purchasing mechanisms other than in-app purchases. They must use Apple's in-app purchase feature, where the app could be rejected or removed, just like Fortnite just did with that lower in-game currency cost. They give an example that in 2016, Apple threatened to remove Spotify for advertising free trials to its own customers. And Apple stated, a developer cannot use its iOS app as a marketing tool to redirect customers outside the app to avoid in-app purchases. So Spotify was trying to do something nice, give free premium so people could listen to more music uninterrupted. And Apple literally threatened to remove them because they weren't going to be able to take that 30% tax, even though Apple Music now is a direct competition for Spotify. But Spotify has to agree to them, or they possibly will lose out on millions of consumers. And since Epic Games has actually put out this lawsuit, Spotify has actually come public and said they back Epic's decision to do this. So moving on, Apple denies consumers innovation. And this is my own kind of personal bias, but mobile games are not nearly as good as they used to be. There's no innovation. They're very repetitive. They're time-based or money-based instead of skill-based. And that goes back to the developers agreement that Apple forces these guidelines on games and is denying innovation for creative games and stuff, which personally, a creative game will always be a repetitive game in my mind. So moving on, they state competition on mobile devices does not affect Apple because Apple's user face has significant switching costs. You're locked in the iOS ecosystem, losing money from app purchases, in-app purchases, or even loss of data if you try and switch to an Android. Now that's huge because you can spend hundreds of dollars on the App Store. And then if you want to switch to a Samsung phone or something like that, you're going to lose all that data unless the game has a second party save data feature like Supercell offers with Clash of Clans and their games, where if you save your data through their website as well, you'll be able to transfer from an Apple to an Android. But other than that, you will lose all of the money you invested and all the time you invested if you have to re-download the game and that game developer does not provide a second save feature outside of those app stores. Then they say that since 2007, Apple has sustained profit margins between 60 and 74%. Now, Apple's equity accumulated to almost $2 trillion already. And that's more money than just about every other company in the world. But then it's not until page 47 that the actual legal stuff comes to light with all the accusations Epic is actually making against Apple. And I'm just going to read, the headlines of each different count. These span 13 pages long. I don't know that much about law, and I don't want to, give you guys the wrong impression by my own thing when it actually comes to the legality of everything. So if you want to read these, it is on page 47 of the lawsuit. But the count titles are unlawful monopoly maintenance in the iOS app distribution market, denial of essential facility in the iOS app distribution market, unreasonable restraint of trade in the iOS app distribution market, unlawful monopoly maintenance in iOS in-app payment processing market, unreasonable restraints of trade in the iOS in-app payment processing market, tying the App Store to the iOS app distribution market, to in-app purchase in the iOS in-app payment processing market, unreasonable restraints of trade in the iOS app distribution market, unreasonable restraints of trade in the iOS in-app payment processing market, tying the App Store in the iOS distribution market to in-app purchases in the iOS in-app processing market. So a lot of those are just them going after them having a monopoly. And like I said, I do suggest you guys actually go through and read all of them. I don't really have time to cover it in this video. But then the last one is count number 10 is California unfair competition law, which prohibits any unlawful, unfair, or fraudulent business act or practice, which Epic Games is stating that Apple has done through these anti-competitive guidelines. They end this lawsuit with a prayer for relief, stating 4 things: that Apple take steps to cease unlawful conduct and restore competition, award declaration of the policy restraints to be unlawful or unenforceable, awarding any other equitable relief necessary to prevent and remedy Apple's anti-competitive conduct, and lastly, granting other relief as the court deems just and proper. So through all this, I hope you really understand that Epic is doing this to try and lower the cost of all apps and all in-app purchases across the board, increase profits for all these third-party developers, and even just create competition in a market where Apple has never had competition and has put guidelines so they won't have competition. Now, monopolies are illegal in the United States where the Apple's headquarters are. So I am excited to see how this turns out, and I will keep you updated if I learn anything new. I really hope this does bring to light that Epic is not doing this for Epic. Epic is doing this for all developers and the consumers, which is you and me. So if you guys would like, I can read through the Google one. Apparently it's slightly different because Google's Play Store and Android devices do have different guidelines where you can download from other websites and that. So if you want to see that, just let me know in the comments. I appreciate your time. I really hope this helps. And thank you for watching. Enjoy your day.